Have you ever walked into a room where everyone assumed you didn't belong? Where they looked at you and decided before you even spoke that you couldn't possibly know what you were doing? Brenda Wright walked into that government impound lot in March 1987, and not a single man there believed she had $6,000 to spend. The morning air sat cold at 42 degrees. West Texas, cold that cut through denim and settled in your bones. Abilene sprawled behind her. The impound lot stretched ahead, chain link fence, rusted tractors lined up like corpses. 30 men, maybe more, feed caps and flannel shirts, boots with manure still caked in the treads. They stood in clusters, talking low, eyeing the equipment, eyeing each other, not eyeing her. Brenda stood at the edge of that lot, alone, 52 years old. White woman from West Texas who'd spent 35 years turning wrenches, wore a Carhartt jacket washed so many times the canvas felt soft as cotton. Jeans stained with grease that wouldn't come out no matter how much detergent you used. Work boots that had seen better decades. She counted tractors the way a jeweler counts stones, not for what they were, for what they could become. 14 machines, 14 pieces of equipment the federal government had seized from bankrupt farms across West Texas between 1984 and 1987. During the worst agricultural collapse since the Dust Bowl, farmers losing everything, banks foreclosing, equipment impounded, now sitting here, waiting for someone to care. The auctioneer climbed onto a flatbed trailer, clipboard in hand, voice already tired, and the sun hadn't even burned off the morning frost yet. First tractor, 1965, Minneapolis Moline. Engine wouldn't turn, tires rotted. The auctioneer started at 800. No bids. 700. Nothing. 600. Silence. He moved on. Second tractor. Same story. Third. Fourth. Brenda watched. Listened. These men weren't here to buy broken machines. They were here for parts. For anything that still ran. For equipment they could flip to the next county over. The 1963 John Deere 4020 sat at the back of the lot. Engine seized solid. Tires flat to the rim. Serial number stamped into a frame the county had declared legally unsellable to any licensed farm equipment dealer in the state, which meant complicated paperwork, which meant headaches, which meant nobody wanted it. The auctioneer reached it, didn't even try to start high. $400. Brenda raised her hand. The man didn't look at her. He scanned the crowd of men in flannel shirts, waiting for a real bid. She raised her hand higher. Someone behind her laughed, short bark of amusement that carried across the lot like a gunshot, like she'd told a joke, like she was the joke. The auctioneer finally noticed, eyes narrowing, something between confusion and irritation. 400. That's what Brenda offered for a machine that hadn't turned over in 3 years, whose previous owner had run it without coolant for the better part of a summer. The auctioneer looked past her again, waiting. No other bids came. His gavel came down. So she did it 13 more times. Stephen Taylor stood near his truck. Dealer from San Angelo watched her win the 4th tractor and shook his head. 5th tractor. 6th. By the 7th, he walked over. "You're buying scrap, lady." Brenda didn't respond, just kept writing serial numbers in her spiral notebook. Small, precise handwriting. Each number recorded with the care of someone who understood that details mattered. That the difference between a 3020 pump and a 4020 pump was the difference between a machine that ran and a machine that destroyed itself. By noon, Brenda Wright had spent $5,800 of the $6,200 she had in savings, owned every seized tractor in that impound lot. She stood in the Texas sun, writing down serial numbers, while the men who'd come to bid packed up their trucks and drove away. Stephen Taylor muttered as he passed her, "Lady's buying herself a pile of scrap." Brenda didn't respond. She just kept writing. But what nobody in that auction lot knew was that Brenda Wright had been rebuilding engines since she was 12 years old, the same month her father died and left her mother with a failing farm and 3 broken tractors. July 1947. Robert Williams farmed 800 acres of cotton outside Lubbock. Good land, hard work, The kind of life where you got up before dawn and went to bed after dark, and somewhere in between you found time to raise a daughter. That July afternoon, he died in his shop, heart attack. 53 years old, hand still gripping a torque wrench, body slumped against a Farmall H tractor he'd been rebuilding. Brenda found him after school, 12 years old, standing in the doorway, seeing her father's body and understanding in the way children understand things they're not supposed to understand yet. She didn't call for help right away. First thought, finish the rebuild, because that's what he would have wanted, because leaving it undone felt worse than. No, that's not right. She didn't think any of that. She called her mother. They buried him 3 days later. The week after the funeral, Brenda went back to the shop, alone, after school, while her mother sat in the house crying or not crying or doing whatever it was mothers did when they lost their husbands. Brenda finished the rebuild. Took 3 days, working alone, after school each day, torqued the head bolts to specification, reconnected the fuel lines, checked the timing. When she finally walked back to the house, the tractor was ready to run. Her mother sold it 2 weeks later, paid for the remaining funeral costs, sold the farm 3 months after that, moved them to Abilene, started over, or tried to. What Brenda learned that week, the lesson that stuck, fixing machines created a space where grief couldn't touch you. For those 3 days, she wasn't a 12-year-old girl who'd lost her father. She was a mechanic finishing a job. The rest, everything after, flowed from that. 1957, age 22. Brenda got her GED, got a job cleaning at Morrison's John Deere dealership in Abilene, sweeping floors, emptying trash, scrubbing grease off workbenches. She watched the mechanics while she worked, memorizing how they diagnosed problems, how they read service manuals, how they talked to the machines like the machines could talk back. Nights she practiced on abandoned equipment in a vacant lot behind her mother's apartment building. By age 26, she could rebuild a carburetor faster than most of Morrison's mechanics. 1959, age 24, she married Kenneth Lewis, insurance salesman, steady work, reliable income, the kind of man who paid his bills on time and believed that problems had solutions if you just found the right approach. Brenda kept cleaning at Morrison's, kept watching, kept learning. 1963, age 28, their daughter Catherine was born. Brenda took 2 weeks off, went back to work. Kenneth's insurance income covered bills. Brenda's cleaning job covered what? Hope, maybe. The possibility of something more. 1964, everything changed. A mechanic quit during harvest season. No notice, just didn't show up. The shop was underwater with repair orders, farmers screaming about delays, equipment sitting broken, money hemorrhaging, the owner desperate. Asked Brenda if she could help with basic maintenance work, oil changes, filter replacements. Nothing complicated. She said yes. By the end of that first week, she was rebuilding a diesel injection pump that 2 of the dealership's regular mechanics had given up on. The owner offered her a full position. 21 years she worked there, 1965 to 1986, turning wrenches, diagnosing problems, rebuilding engines that other mechanics had declared dead. She became a master mechanic, got certified in 1972, the only woman in West Texas with that certification. Farmers started requesting her specifically because Brenda had a reputation for fixing things that couldn't be fixed. She could diagnose a failing hydraulic pump from the sound it made 3 bays away, could feel a misaligned bearing through the vibration in a wrench handle, didn't need computerized diagnostic equipment because the machines told her what was wrong if you knew how to listen. December 1986, the new owner called her into his office. Young man, 34 years old, MBA from somewhere that wasn't Texas, wore button-down shirts that looked too clean for a place that smelled like diesel and grease. He told her the dealership was modernizing. Computerized diagnostics were the future. They needed younger staff, people who could work with the new systems. He said it like he was doing her a favor, like 51 years old was ancient, like 51 years old meant she couldn't learn. Brenda found out later through a former colleague who still worked the floor. The real reason wasn't about computers. The new owner wanted a professional image. That meant an all-male shop. That meant mechanics who looked like what people expected mechanics to look like. That meant Brenda Wright needed to go. They gave her $3,200 in severance. 21 years of work reduced to a check that barely covered 2 months of mortgage payments. She cleaned out her toolbox on a Friday afternoon, loading wrenches and socket sets and specialized equipment she'd bought herself into the back of her truck. The younger mechanics watched her leave. None of them said anything. Kenneth didn't understand why she was taking it so hard. She had savings. They had his income. She could retire, maybe find part-time work doing something easier, something more appropriate for a woman her age. He said it kindly, meaning well. But the words landed like stones. Brenda was 51 years old, not dead, had 35 years of knowledge, 35 years of skills the world had just told her it didn't need anymore. January 1987. February. Brenda spent 2 months driving to every government impound lot within 200 miles of Abilene, writing down serial numbers of seized farm equipment. By late February, she had a list of 43 tractors. Most were in terrible condition. Many had paperwork problems that made them legally complicated to resell. All of them were cheap, because nobody wanted to take on machines with that many problems. The night before the March auction, she sat at the kitchen table, notebook and calculator, adding up what she could afford. Kenneth stood in the doorway, watching her work, face showing the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned not to argue with his wife when her mind was set. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to buy tractors and rebuild them." Why? Brenda looked up from her calculations. For the first time since December, her eyes had something in them besides resignation. "Because I can." The evening after the auction, Brenda pulled into her driveway, just as the sun was dropping below the horizon. Kenneth's car was already there, which meant he was home from work, which meant she had to explain what she'd done. $5,800, most of their savings, gone in 3 hours on machines that couldn't run. She sat in the truck for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to figure out how to make him understand. The kitchen smelled like coffee when she came through the door. Kenneth stood at the counter, back to her, pouring from a pot he must have just made. He didn't turn around. "You went to the auction?" "Yes." "Buy anything, all of it." Kenneth turned then, coffee pot still in his hand. Face showed no anger, just a kind of tired concern that was somehow worse. He set the pot down carefully, like he was buying himself time to think of what to say next. How much? $5,800. The number hung in the air between them, Kenneth doing the math. What that meant for their savings, for the mortgage, for Catherine's college expenses. Their daughter was still at Texas Tech, 2 more years until graduation, and the tuition payments weren't getting smaller. "Brenda, we have a mortgage. Catherine's in school." "I know. Nobody's going to rent a tractor from a woman working out of a shed." The words came out gentle, but they cut anyway. Not because Kenneth was being cruel, because he was being practical, because he was probably right, because the world they lived in didn't make space for 51-year-old women who rebuilt tractors in their spare time and expected anyone to take them seriously. "Maybe it's time to accept you're retired." Brenda looked at her husband, this man she'd been married to for 27 years, who sold insurance and played by the rules and believed that problems had solutions if you just found the right approach. She loved him, but in that moment, she also hated him a little bit for saying out loud the thing everyone else was thinking. "I'm 51, not dead." Kenneth ran his hand through his hair, gesture of frustration he usually tried to hide. They had bills. They had responsibilities. They had a life that depended on making sensible decisions, and spending $5,800 on broken tractors wasn't sensible. "What's the plan here? Really?" Brenda pulled out the notebook, opened it to the first page where she'd sketched out rough calculations. She walked him through it. "Buy seized equipment at auction, below market value, because nobody else would bid on machines with obvious mechanical failures. Rebuild them to working order. rent them by the season to farmers who needed operational capacity they couldn't afford to replace. The rental would cover the cost of the machine in 1 to 2 seasons. After that, profit. Kenneth listened. He was a good man, careful with money, but not mean about it. When she finished, he asked the question she'd been expecting. And when one breaks down in the middle of harvest, when a farmer's got 400 acres to bring in and your rebuilt tractor dies, I fix it. You can't be everywhere. I can be where I'm needed. They stood in the kitchen as darkness filled the windows and the coffee pot cooled on the counter. Finally, Kenneth picked up the pot and poured 2 cups, sliding one across to Brenda. It was the closest thing to acceptance she was going to get. Catherine came home for spring break that weekend, pulling into the driveway in her roommate's borrowed car. She was 24 years old, finishing her accounting degree, planning to graduate in May and move to Dallas for a job she'd already lined up. She found Brenda in the garage, going through toolboxes, sorting wrenches and socket sets into organized rows. "Mom, what's all this getting ready?" For what? Catherine listened as Brenda explained. The auction, the tractors, the plan. Unlike Kenneth, she didn't question the math or the logistics. She asked different questions. Where will you work? Already rented a metal building, edge of our property, $180 a month. What about parts suppliers? Found a retired dealer in Amarillo. Still has a warehouse full of 60s John Deere inventory that nobody's wanted for a decade. How do you handle customers who don't want to work with a woman? Those aren't my customers. Catherine sat on an overturned bucket, watching her mother work. After a while, she mentioned that she'd been struggling with her accounting courses. The theory made sense, but the practical application felt disconnected from anything real. She was thinking about maybe dropping the major, switching to something else. Brenda stopped sorting wrenches, looked at her daughter. "You finish what you start. I taught you that." The words came out harder than she'd intended, sharpened by her own frustration with the world. Catherine flinched slightly, then nodded. Brenda set down the wrench she'd been holding. "I'm sorry. I just mean you're so close. Don't let it beat you now." Catherine smiled. Small thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. Kind of like you and these tractors. Kind of like that. The building Brenda rented sat on 2 acres of hard-packed dirt, about a mile from their house. 1,200 square feet of corrugated metal with a concrete floor and overhead doors wide enough to drive a tractor through. It had been used for cotton storage before the farm crisis, then sat empty for 3 years. The owner was happy to rent it for cheap. No questions asked about what Brenda planned to do there. She had the first tractor delivered on a Wednesday afternoon, the 1963 John Deere 4020. The worst of the 14 she'd bought. A borrowed flatbed trailer brought it from the impound lot. 2 men from the county unloaded it using a chain hoist and a lot of swearing. The machine rolled off the trailer and sat there on her concrete floor. 4 tons of mechanical failure. Her neighbor came over while Brenda stood looking at her purchase. Shirley Allen, 54 years old, widow who'd been running 900 acres of wheat alone since her husband died in 1985. Shirley knew farming, knew equipment, had worked alongside her husband for 30 years before his heart attack. She walked around the 4020 twice, taking in the flat tires, the seized engine, the cracked fiberglass hood. "Brenda, honey, I know you can fix a tractor, but can you fix one that's been dead 3 years? Guess we'll find out." Shirley nodded, but her face showed the kind of polite skepticism people use when they don't want to be rude. She went back to her property without saying anything else. Brenda watched her go, then turned back to the 4020. The previous owner had run it without coolant for what the seized cylinder walls suggested was the better part of a summer. 2 pistons had welded themselves to the bore. The injection pump had been replaced with an aftermarket unit that was 3 specifications wrong for the engine displacement. The open station frame with its cracked fiberglass hood, had been used as a bird roost for long enough that the wiring harness was compromised in 11 separate places. Brenda started taking it apart on Thursday morning. She didn't have a business plan. She didn't have a spreadsheet. What she had was the notebook Catherine had left behind when she went to college. Wide-ruled and spiral-bound, now repurposed for recording every part number, every torque specification, every injection pump clearance, every valve timing sequence for every machine she was going to rebuild. The engine work took 6 weeks. She pulled the head and found the welded pistons, confirming what she'd suspected from the initial inspection. The block was salvageable, but she needed new pistons, new rings, new cylinder sleeves. Parts suppliers wouldn't sell to a homeowner, only to licensed dealers. She spent 2 days making phone calls before finding Donald Harris, retired dealer in Amarillo, who still had a warehouse full of 60s inventory gathering dust. Donald didn't ask questions when Brenda called. He just confirmed part numbers and quoted prices. "Do you take payment from individual buyers?" He laughed. "Lady, I've been trying to sell this stuff for 10 years. You got money, I got parts." She drove to Amarillo on a Saturday, Kenneth riding along in the passenger seat, saying nothing. They loaded pistons and rings and gaskets and seals into the truck bed. Donald showed her around his warehouse, pointing out inventory he'd accumulated over 40 years of dealing. When Brenda mentioned she needed a cylinder sleeve for the 4020, Donald walked her to the back corner where a wooden crate held exactly what she needed. She bought it for $40, 1/10 what a new sleeve would cost from a current dealer. On the drive home, Kenneth finally spoke. "You really think this is going to work? I think I'm going to find out." The hydraulic system came next. The 4020 ran a closed center design, different from the open center systems on older John Deere models. The pump the previous owner had installed came from a 3020, which operated at a different pressure range. Brenda pulled the wrong pump and called dealers across West Texas, trying to source the correct replacement. Most of them had never heard of anyone asking for 60s hydraulic components. The dealer in San Angelo laughed when she explained what she needed. "Ma'am, nobody rebuilds those anymore. You're better off buying a newer machine." "I don't want a newer machine. I want this pump." He found one in his back room, still in the original packaging from 1964. $55. Brenda drove to San Angelo that afternoon and had it installed by evening. The wiring harness required complete replacement. 11 compromised points. 11 places where bird droppings had corroded through the insulation and exposed bare wire. Brenda could have tried tracing each fault and repairing it individually. But that was borrowing trouble. A machine going back to work needed reliable electrical, not patch jobs that might fail during planting season. She ordered a complete harness from a supplier in Oklahoma and spent 3 days running new wire through the frame. March turned to April, April to May. The building got hot in the afternoons, metal walls radiating heat like an oven. Brenda worked in t-shirts and jeans, hair tied back, hands black with grease by the end of each day. She came home for dinner with Kenneth, then went back to the shop and worked until midnight. Some nights she fell asleep on the concrete floor, waking at 2 in the morning with her cheek pressed against oil-stained cement. Kenneth stopped questioning the plan. Instead, he started helping. He built a workbench along one wall, installed better lighting overhead, brought her sandwiches and coffee when he finished work for the day. They didn't talk much while she worked. He just sat on an overturned bucket and watched her hands solve problems. The same hands that had been solving problems since she was 12 years old. The tires went on last. 4 used agricultural tires from a salvage yard in Sweetwater. Not new, good enough. Brenda mounted them herself, fighting with the bead seating process until her shoulders ached and her hands cramped. By the time she finished, it was late June, 4 months since the auction. She filled the engine with oil, checked the coolant level, connected the battery. The 4020 sat in her shop, looking almost functional, a transformation from the seized hulk that had rolled off the trailer in March. Brenda walked around it 3 times, checking connections, looking for anything she might have missed, finding nothing. She climbed into the open station seat. The starter turned slow on the first crank. The engine turned over, but didn't catch. Second crank, same result. Third crank, the diesel fired, and the whole machine shuddered as combustion found its rhythm. Brenda let it idle, watching the temperature gauge, watching the oil pressure, listening for the knock that would tell her a bearing wasn't seated right or a clearance was off. There was no knock. There was nothing but the sound of a diesel engine doing exactly what a diesel engine was supposed to do. The sound of machinery that had been dead for 3 years, now alive again because someone had taken the time to understand what it needed. She let it idle for 45 minutes. The temperature stabilized. The oil pressure held steady. No smoke from the exhaust beyond the initial startup haze. No unusual vibrations. No warning signs of hidden problems waiting to surface. When she finally shut it down, the silence felt heavier than it should have. Brenda sat in the seat for a few minutes, hands still on the steering wheel, feeling something she hadn't felt since December. Not pride exactly. Proof. Proof that she could still do this. Proof that 35 years of knowledge counted for something. Proof that the world's opinion of her mattered less than what her hands could build. She drove the 4020 out of the building and across her property, testing the steering, the brakes, the hydraulics. Everything worked. Everything she'd rebuilt from scattered parts and careful attention now functioned as a cohesive machine. She drove it back into the shop and shut it down. Then she went inside and called Shirley Allen. The phone rang 4 times before Shirley picked up. "You want to rent a tractor for fall harvest?" Shirley was quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that meant she was thinking through implications. "I already have my own equipment. Mine's $800 for the season, all maintenance included. What if it breaks down? I fix it. That's the deal." Shirley was silent again, longer this time. In West Texas, in 1987, renting agricultural equipment wasn't a standard arrangement. Farmers either owned their machines or bought used through dealers. The rental market was thin, mostly limited to specialized equipment for short-term needs. Nobody rented basic tractors for an entire season. "I'll think about it. Take your time." 3 days later, Shirley drove over in her pickup truck. She parked in front of the shop and sat there for a minute before getting out. When she finally emerged, she walked around the 4020, checking the hydraulics on the loader, pulling the dipstick, looking at the tires. She spent 20 minutes inspecting every accessible component, running her hands over rebuilt parts, testing connections. "My husband taught me to check dipsticks before I check smiles. You passed both tests." Shirley agreed to 1 season, fall harvest only. She'd pay $400 up front, $400 on completion. If the tractor worked the way Brenda claimed, she'd consider renewing for the following year. If it broke down, they'd renegotiate. Brenda stuck out her hand. Shirley shook it, grip firm and calloused from 3 decades of farm work. That was July 1987. Brenda Wright had just rented her first tractor. She had 13 more to rebuild. By the end of 1988, Brenda had 6 tractors in active rotation. Shirley renewed her contract without hesitation after the 4020 worked through fall harvest without a single failure. She'd even asked about renting a second machine for spring planting. Brenda had the 1961 International 560 ready by March, rebuilt over the winter with the same methodical attention she'd given the 4020. Shirley took it for the season and paid cash up front. Word moved the way it always moved in rural Texas. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Timothy Moore farmed 600 acres of cotton north of Abilene. Heard about Brenda from Shirley at a Farm Bureau meeting. Called in April 1989 asking if she had anything available for planting season. Brenda had just finished rebuilding a 1965 Minneapolis Moline G7-05 that the auction catalog had listed simply as non-operational. $900 for the season, all maintenance included. "What happens if the tractor breaks during a critical window? I'll be there within 4 hours, day or night." Timothy thought about it for 2 days, then agreed. The Moline ran through his entire cotton planting without issue. When he returned it in June, he asked about fall harvest rental. The phone number Brenda gave to renters was their home line. Same number Kenneth used for his insurance business. She had an answering machine installed, but she rarely let calls go to it during planting and harvest seasons. Spring and fall, she kept the phone within arm's reach every waking hour. She slept light, trained herself to wake at the first ring. Kenneth adjusted, learned to sleep through the midnight calls that came every few weeks during peak season. The call came at 2:47 on a Thursday morning in June of 1989. Brenda picked up before the second ring, already swinging her legs out of bed. Timothy's voice came through tight with stress. Hydraulic line blew on the Moline. "I'm down. Which line? Loader circuit looks like the pressure side. I'll be there in 40 minutes." She dressed in the dark, grabbed her truck keys and a flashlight. Kenneth stirred but didn't wake. Brenda had a road kit already packed in the truck bed. Basic tools and common replacement parts organized in metal boxes. She'd learned to anticipate failures, stock the components most likely to need emergency replacement. For the Moline, that meant hydraulic lines cut to common lengths, spare fittings, extra fluid. She made the drive to Timothy's place in 38 minutes, faster than she should have on county roads in the dark. His farmyard lights were on when she pulled in. Timothy stood next to the disabled Moline with a trouble light illuminating the failed line. Brenda could see the problem before she got out of the truck. Pressure side hydraulic line, exactly as he'd said, blown at a fitting that had been crimped wrong during the original installation decades ago. The fitting had finally fatigued through. She had the replacement line out of her truck and the failed section removed in 15 minutes. The new line went in clean, proper crimp fittings on both ends, torqued to specification. She bled the system, tested the loader function, checked for leaks under pressure. Total repair time, 32 minutes. Timothy stood watching, exhaustion visible even in the harsh work light. "How'd you know what size line to bring? I put it in." "I know what fails." Timothy paid her the full seasonal rental fee the next morning, then asked if she had anything available for his fall harvest. She promised him the 1968 Oliver 185. Oh, she'd been rebuilding since March. By 1990, Brenda had 11 tractors in active rental rotation. She'd been back to government auctions 3 more times, each time buying machines that other dealers wouldn't touch. A pair of 1968 Oliver 1850s pulled from a creek bottom pasture, their frames showing surface rust through deteriorated paint. A 1970 Case 970 with a transmission destroyed by someone who'd run it without adequate lubrication. A 1966 John Deere 3020 that had been sitting in a county impound lot since 1985. Its fuel system completely fouled by degraded diesel. She fixed them all. The work consumed every hour. She wasn't sleeping or eating. Kenneth handled the administrative side, maintaining a calendar that tracked every rented machine, every scheduled maintenance interval, every customer commitment. The calendar lived on their kitchen wall, large grid showing the entire year at a glance. During planting and harvest seasons, nearly every square had notations in Kenneth's careful handwriting. From April through June, and again from September through November, Brenda lived in a state of perpetual motion. She was either in the shop rebuilding something or in her truck responding to a call. The space between those two activities barely existed. Kenneth kept coffee brewing 24 hours a day, brought her food she often forgot to eat, answered the phone when she was elbow deep in a transmission rebuild. In 1993, Kenneth insisted they formalize the business structure. They'd been operating under Brenda's name for tax purposes, but as the operation grew, they needed proper legal standing. They registered Right Equipment Services with the county, opened a business checking account, started keeping receipts organized in a filing system that Kenneth set up in their spare bedroom. The filing cabinet held service records for every machine, each tractor's complete history from acquisition through every rental period and every repair. Brenda maintained these records herself, handwritten logs that tracked parts replaced, hours operated, problems reported by renters. When a machine came back at the end of a rental season, Brenda inspected it against its service record. She didn't rely on the renter to tell her what needed work. She knew what to expect based on how the machine had performed previously, what its weak points were, what components were approaching the end of their service life. Then she rebuilt whatever needed rebuilding before the tractor went back out. This wasn't standard practice in the rental industry. Most equipment rental operations expected renters to handle basic maintenance and return machines in roughly the condition they'd received them. Normal wear accepted. Brenda's contract said the opposite. The machine was hers. The maintenance was her responsibility. The renter's only job was to operate it and report anything that felt wrong. In practice, this meant Brenda spent more time maintaining her fleet than a traditional rental business would. But it also meant her uptime rate was substantially higher. A farmer who rented from Brenda knew the machine had been thoroughly inspected and serviced before it reached his property. He knew that if something did go wrong, Brenda would respond immediately. He knew that his only risk was the seasonal rental fee, not the hidden costs of maintenance and repair that came with ownership. By the end of 1993, Brenda had built a customer base of 19 farming operations across 3 counties. Her fleet had grown to 23 machines. She'd bought a second metal building, this one 2,400 square feet. To handle the heavier rebuilding work, engine overhauls and transmission rebuilds moved to the larger space. The original 1,200 square foot building became dedicated to parts storage and electrical work. The business was profitable, though Brenda and Kenneth drew minimal income from it. Most revenue went back into acquiring and rebuilding additional machines. Kenneth kept working his insurance business, his income covering their living expenses, while Wright Equipment Services grew. Spring of 1994 arrived with the kind of weather that made farmers nervous. Late freeze warnings through March, then sudden heat in early April that accelerated planting schedules. Everyone rushed to get seeds in the ground during a compressed optimal window. Brenda had 19 tractors out on rental contracts. Her phone started ringing before dawn most days, with farmers reporting minor issues or requesting pre-planting inspections. 3 tractors went down during a 2-week span in late April. Not catastrophically, not in ways that would alarm someone unfamiliar with mechanical systems, but in ways that told Brenda she was approaching the limits of what deferred component aging could be managed through regular maintenance alone. The 1961 International 560 developed a bearing knock in the final drive. Not an emergency failure, but the kind of progressive wear that would become one if left unaddressed through another season. The 1966 John Deere 3020 started showing governor issues. Fuel delivery inconsistency at high load that was manageable now, but getting worse each week. The Oliver 1850 had a crack developing in the cast iron of the rear axle housing that Brenda found during a routine inspection. That crack meant the machine could not be rented, period. All 3 tractors were in active service with farmers mid-planting season. Brenda made the calls, personally explaining the situation to each operator. She had loaners available, machines she'd been holding back while finishing their rebuilds. She spent 17 hours over 4 days managing the transitions, delivering replacement tractors, retrieving the failed units. The bearing replacement on the International took her 3 full days of work, pulling the final drive completely apart and rebuilding it from the differential out. The governor issue on the 3020 required sourcing a replacement component from a dealer in Lubbock who hadn't stocked that part in 15 years, but found one in his back room covered in dust. All 3 repairs consumed time and money. Brenda hadn't budgeted for that month. The business had reserves enough to cover unexpected costs, but 3 simultaneous failures stretched those reserves thinner than Kenneth was comfortable with. He didn't say anything directly, just started doing the math on his yellow legal pad late at night, calculating how many more emergency repairs they could handle before they needed to dip into their personal savings. Then Catherine came home. Brenda was in the shop on a Tuesday afternoon, rebuilding the International's final drive, when she heard a car pull into the driveway. She recognized the sound of Catherine's Toyota, distinctive from the rattle in its exhaust system that her daughter had been meaning to fix for months, but Catherine wasn't supposed to be home. She had her accounting job in Dallas, had been there since graduating college 7 years ago. Brenda wiped her hands on a shop rag and walked outside. Catherine sat in her car with the engine off, both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Brenda tapped on the driver's window. Catherine turned, and Brenda could see she'd been crying. The whole story came out over the next hour. Sitting at the kitchen table while Kenneth poured coffee, neither of them drank. Catherine had been laid off 3 weeks ago, firm downsizing after losing a major client. Last hired, first feared. She'd started in 1987, 7 years, but still considered junior. No severance, not considered a long-term employee. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the debt, $22,000. She'd co-signed student loans for an ex-boyfriend. They dated from 1990 to 1992. He dropped out of grad school in 1992. Disappeared. Catherine was legally liable. She'd been making payments from her salary. Now no salary meant 60 days from default. There was more. She'd been engaged to a different man, met him at work when she told him about the job loss and the debt situation. He said he couldn't start a marriage with this kind of financial burden. He broke the engagement the same week she got laid off. Catherine kept the ring, sold it to make 2 months of payments on the loans. Kenneth's reaction was immediate. They'd help with the debt, figure out a payment plan. Family came first. Brenda understood the impulse, wanted to help her daughter, but the timing was catastrophic. The business had just absorbed 3 expensive repairs. International 560 bearing, $850 in parts plus labor. The 3020 Governor issue, $320. The Oliver 1850 axle crack weld, $200. They had seasonal rental income coming, but that wouldn't arrive for months. Their personal savings were meant for emergencies, but $22,000 was a different category of emergency than they'd planned for. The argument happened after Catherine went to bed, exhausted from the drive and the confession. Kenneth stood at the kitchen counter, voice carefully controlled in the way it got when he was working hard not to shout. Catherine needs us. The business can wait. If I don't fix those tractors, now we lose those customers forever. Then what do we help Catherine with? You're choosing tractors over your daughter. The words landed like a punch. Brenda felt something crack inside her. The careful balance she'd maintained between being a mother and being a business owner, suddenly impossible to sustain. I'm choosing to keep a business that can help our daughter, help all of us. If we drain our savings now, what happens when the next emergency comes? When another 3 tractors go down simultaneously, this business is the only thing standing between us and the same crisis that took down half the farms in Texas. Kenneth was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. So, what do? We work. I fix the tractors. You keep the books. We get through the season. Then we figure out Catherine's debt. They went to bed without resolving anything, laying next to each other in the dark, with 3 feet of emotional distance between them. Brenda couldn't sleep. She kept running numbers in her head, calculating how much the repairs would cost against projected seasonal revenue. The math was tight, but workable, assuming no more failures, and assuming all her current renters paid on time. Catherine stayed. She didn't ask permission. just moved her stuff into her old bedroom and started looking for work in Abilene. The job market wasn't good. She applied to accounting firms, bookkeeping services, even retail positions. Nothing materialized. After 2 weeks of rejections, she approached Brenda with a proposal. "Let me do your books properly." Catherine had been looking at the filing system. Kenneth did his best, but his insurance training hadn't prepared him for tracking equipment, depreciation, and maintenance costs across 24 machines. "I've been looking at your filing system. It's disorganized. You're losing money because you don't track expenses correctly. You're probably overpaying taxes because you're not claiming legitimate business deductions. Let me fix it. I can't pay you. Call it working off my debt, to you and to myself." Brenda looked at her daughter, this 31-year-old woman who'd come home defeated and was now trying to find a way to contribute. "All right, show me what you can do." Catherine spent the next week going through every receipt, every service record, every rental contract in the filing cabinet. She built a spreadsheet on their home computer, categorizing expenses, tracking income by machine and by customer, calculating actual profit margins for each piece of equipment. When she showed Brenda the results, the numbers were sobering. "You're making money, but barely. Your maintenance costs are eating 38% of rental income. Industry standard is 22. You're over-maintaining." "I maintain what needs maintaining. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you need to charge more or accept lower margins. At your current rate structure, one bad year wipes you out." Brenda studied the spreadsheet, seeing her business reduced to numbers that didn't account for relationships or reliability or the value of answering the phone at 2 a.m. But the numbers didn't lie. She was running too close to the edge. "What do you recommend?" Catherine suggested. "Raising rates 10%. Adding a surcharge for emergency service calls. Stopping the practice of eating time and mileage costs." Brenda thought about her customers. Farmers operating on margins just as thin as hers. People who trusted her because she didn't nickel and dime them for every service call. "I'm not charging farmers extra for emergency calls. That's part of the deal. Then you need to reduce maintenance costs or accept that you're running a charity. It's not charity, it's insurance. Every dollar I spend on maintenance is a dollar I don't spend on catastrophic failures during peak season." Catherine closed the laptop and looked at her mother with something like understanding. "You really believe that? I know that. 35 years of working on machines teaches you that prevention costs less than repair." They compromised. Brenda agreed to a 5% rate increase for new contracts, grandfathering existing customers at their current rates. Catherine would take over all bookkeeping and administrative work, organizing the chaos of Brenda's record-keeping into something the IRS wouldn't question. In exchange, Catherine lived at home rent-free while she rebuilt her finances and her life. The arrangement worked. Catherine discovered she was good at the business side of equipment rental, had a talent for scheduling and customer communication that complemented Brenda's mechanical expertise. By fall of 1994, Right Equipment Services had clean books, better cash flow management, and a daughter who'd found purpose in the work her mother had built. The competition arrived in 1995, though Brenda didn't recognize it as competition at first. Agri Lease Corporation opened a regional office in Abilene in March. National equipment rental company with capital backing and ambitions to expand throughout Texas. They leased a commercial building on the highway, professional signage and a parking lot, and a service manager who wore a company polo shirt to work. Their fleet consisted of late-model tractors, machines from the 1980s and early 1990s with enclosed cabs and modern hydraulics. They ran advertisements in the local paper and sent direct mail brochures to every farming operation in the county. Their rental rates were higher than Brenda's, sometimes significantly so, but they sold convenience and professionalism and equipment that looked like what farmers saw in dealer showrooms. The regional manager was a woman named Pamela Clark, 36 years old, MBA from Texas Tech, sent from Dallas corporate to establish the market. She drove a new Chevy Silverado with the AgriLease logo on the door and dressed like someone who'd learned about farming from trade publications rather than dirt. Brenda heard about AgriLease from Timothy Moore, who'd received their direct mail package and wanted to know if she was worried about the competition. She wasn't. Not really. Her customers valued relationships and reliability over professional presentation. They rented from her because she answered the phone and fixed their problems, not because her shop looked impressive. The first 6 months proved her right. AgriLease signed 7 new customers, all farmers who'd never used equipment rental before and were attracted by the modern machines and professional marketing. Brenda lost 0 customers. Her existing base stayed loyal, renewed their contracts without hesitation. Pamela Clark noticed. By fall of 1995, she was asking questions around town, trying to understand why AgriLease wasn't capturing the established rental market. She drove by Brenda's property, saw the 2 metal buildings and the tractors in various states of service. She talked to farmers at Farm Bureau meetings, asked casual questions about their equipment sources. What she learned frustrated her. The woman mechanic operating out of a shed had somehow captured customer loyalty that AgriLease's superior resources and modern equipment couldn't overcome. Pamela reported back to Dallas that the market was more difficult than projected, that local relationships mattered more than corporate efficiency. Dallas gave her a year to turn it around. Spring 1996 brought Pamela's first strategic move, a price promotion, 30% off. First-year rental on any new or late-model machine. The offer targeted Brenda's 11 longest-tenured customers by name. Direct mail packages that emphasized AgriLease's advantages, modern equipment, GPS-ready platforms, professional service infrastructure, and now competitive pricing. 8 of those 11 customers renewed with Brenda instead. The 9th, a younger farmer who'd taken over his father's operation and wanted precision agriculture capability, signed with AgriLease. The other 2 took the promotional pricing, but came back to Brenda the following year. Pamela escalated. At Farm Bureau meetings and agricultural co-op gatherings, she started dropping comments that sounded helpful, but carried implications. Concerns about reliability, when equipment maintenance depended on one person. Questions about whether a woman working alone could handle heavy mechanical work like transmission replacement. Suggestions that farmers might want to consider service capacity when choosing rental providers. And then, a new rumor. One that made Catherine's hand shake when she heard it at the feed store. "I've heard she had heart problems last year. Can't be crawling under machines anymore." It was false, completely fabricated, but effective. The rumors reached Brenda through Catherine, who overheard a conversation at the feed store. 2 farmers discussing whether to try AgriLease because it seemed more professional, more reliable than depending on one woman mechanic who might not be able to keep up with demand. Catherine came home angry, ready for Brenda to confront Pamela directly, to threaten legal action for slander. But Brenda's response was quieter, more calculated. "We don't fight talk with talk. We fight talk with work." She doubled down on service, started carrying more spare parts in her truck, organized by the machines currently out on rental, cut her response time from 4 hours to under 2 hours on average, added a new service offering, free pre-season inspections for all customers. The farmers who received those inspections appreciated the attention, the sense that Brenda cared about their success beyond collecting rental fees. The counterattack won customers not through confrontation, but through demonstrated value. Timothy Moore had briefly considered switching to AgriLease, had a hydraulic system failure on one of their rented tractors during wheat harvest in June 1997. He called their service line and was told, Someone would be out Tuesday. It was Thursday. He was losing crop. Timothy called Brenda, even though he wasn't renting her equipment that season, even though he'd essentially rejected her for agri-lease. "Brenda, I know I don't deserve this, but—" She cut him off. "What's the address?" She arrived 90 minutes later, diagnosed the problem: pump failure, manufacturing defect in agri-lease's modern equipment, fixed it temporarily using parts from her truck and improvised adapters, got him through his harvest window, didn't charge anything. Timothy stood in his wheat field, combine running again, the relief on his face mixing with something that looked like shame. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. But if you want to rent from me next year, call." That weekend, Timothy wrote a letter to the editor of the local paper, described the entire incident, didn't name agri-lease specifically, but everyone knew. He praised Brenda's commitment to farmers over profit. The letter, published, ran on the front page of the farm and ranch section. The fallout was immediate. Timothy switched back to Brenda for the 1998 season. Gary Young, another farmer who'd tried agri-lease, also switched back. "I missed knowing that when something went wrong, you'd show up before the problem cost me money." By fall of 1997, Brenda had 15 active customers, up from 13 the year before. Agri-lease had 9 customers, down from 11. Pamela tried deeper price cuts, 40% off promotional rates that barely covered agri-lease's overhead costs. She attracted 2 new customers, both small operators with limited acreage. Dallas corporate started questioning the return on investment, asking why the Abilene market wasn't scaling the way their models predicted. Pamela got 1 year to demonstrate growth, or the office would be reassessed. She didn't make it, transferred back to Dallas in 2000 after failing to meet growth projections for 3 consecutive quarters. A different manager took over, ran the operation for 2 more years with equally disappointing results. Corporate finally decided the market wasn't scaling the way their business model required. Agri-lease Corporation closed its Abilene office in October 2002. The failure wasn't about competition with Brenda, though that's how some people interpreted it. The real problem was structural. Agri-lease needed high volume to justify their overhead costs. The commercial building lease, the fleet of modern equipment, the salaried staff, they required 100+ rental contracts annually to break even on their operational expenses. West Texas didn't have that many farmers interested in equipment rental, and the ones who were interested valued relationships over professional presentation. Their service model created additional problems. Agri-lease operated on scheduled appointments, business hours, standard procedures designed for efficiency at scale, but agricultural work didn't respect business hours. A farmer with a broken tractor at 2 in the morning during harvest season needed immediate response, not an appointment for the following Tuesday. Agri-lease's systems couldn't accommodate that kind of flexibility without undermining their entire operational structure. Modern equipment helped initially, attracted customers who wanted GPS-ready platforms and climate-controlled cabs. But modern equipment broke down just as frequently as older machines. And when it did, Agri-lease's service response was identical to their competitors. 3 to 5 days turnaround, parts on back order, mechanics who treated farmers like customers rather than partners. Brenda heard about the closure from Timothy, who drove by the empty building and saw contractors removing the agri-lease signage. She didn't comment, just went back to work. Catherine asked later if she felt vindicated. Nobody won. They just didn't understand what farmers need. The validation came from an unexpected source in July 1997. The USDA published a report on agricultural equipment access in rural communities. The report identified equipment availability, specifically the gap between what small and mid-sized farming operations needed during peak seasonal windows and what they could afford to own or access through traditional dealers. as a significant constraint on production efficiency in the Southern Plains states. Buried in the appendices was a case study. A rental operation in Taylor County, Texas, had developed what the researchers described as a relationship-based maintenance model that achieved unusually high equipment uptime during peak operational periods. The study didn't name Wright Equipment Services directly, but anyone familiar with the area would recognize the description. Brenda read the report at the kitchen table, Catherine sitting across from her with a cup of coffee, going cold between her hands. The academic language felt foreign. Words like infrastructure and operational efficiency used to describe what Brenda thought of simply as doing the job right. But underneath the jargon was recognition that what she'd built mattered, that it solved real problems in ways traditional approaches didn't. Someone thinks we're worth studying. Mom, someone thinks you're proving the entire industry wrong. A month later, a woman named Angela Torres knocked on Brenda's door. She had a Ph.D. in agricultural economics from Texas A&M, had been studying equipment access barriers in rural Texas farming communities for 7 years. She'd read the USDA report and tracked down Wright Equipment Services through county business registrations. She wanted to document Brenda's operation for academic research. Brenda's first instinct was to say no. She didn't have time for interviews and studies, didn't see what there was to document beyond fixing tractors and keeping promises. But Angela Torres was persistent in a way that reminded Brenda of herself. Polite, but unwilling to accept refusal. I've been looking for an operation like yours for 3 years. Nobody else is doing this. Nobody else has figured out how to make small-scale equipment rental economically viable while maintaining the service levels farmers actually need. I just fix tractors and rent them. That's exactly the point. Angela Torres spent 4 days at the property that September. She sat with Catherine, going through the filing cabinet, reading every service record, every rental contract, every parts invoice dating back to March 1987. She interviewed Brenda in the evenings after shop work ended, asking questions about decision-making processes and maintenance philosophy and customer relationship management. She called 6 of Brenda's renters, documented their experiences, their satisfaction levels, their reasons for choosing Wright Equipment Services over alternatives, what she found, and what she eventually published in a 1998 paper in the Journal of Agricultural Economics. Was this. Brenda Wright had built over 11 years without formal business training or outside capital, a functional rural equipment, rental, and maintenance cooperative that had served 43 distinct farming operations across 4 counties, while achieving an average equipment uptime rate during peak planting and harvest windows of 94.7%. The industry average for comparable equipment at that time was 71%. The difference? 23.7 percentage points of additional uptime. Translated across Brenda's customer base to an estimated $1.2 million in additional productivity per year. Crops planted on schedule. Harvests completed before weather windows closed. Ground worked when soil conditions were optimal rather than when equipment happened to be available. But what the research paper didn't capture, what no data could measure, was the moment Brenda read her own work described as innovative agricultural infrastructure. She was sitting in her shop at 10 in the evening, covered in hydraulic fluid from rebuilding a cylinder, and she started crying. Kenneth found her an hour later, the academic paper open on her workbench, her eyes red, but her face showing something he hadn't seen since before Morrison's had fired her. Pride, maybe, or vindication, or just the simple acknowledgement that 11 years of answering the phone at 2 in the morning had meant something beyond her own survival. Brenda read the paper twice, then called Angela Torres with one correction. It wasn't 41 operations, Catherine counted. It was 43. Angela Torres published an erratum. Brenda taped the original paper, to the inside of her shop door, right where she could see it while working. She didn't frame it or preserve it carefully. She just wanted it visible. A reminder that what looked like common sense to her looked like innovation to people who studied these things professionally. The paper yellowed over the following months, got spotted with grease, its corners curling in the West Texas heat. Brenda never replaced it. Late 1998 brought news that rearranged everything Brenda thought she understood about the future. Kenneth was 64 when it happened, early November. Small stroke while at his insurance office. A coworker found him slumped at his desk. Couldn't move his right arm. Speech slurred. The hospital administered TPA. Caught it early enough that most function returned within 48 hours. But the doctor was serious. This was a warning stroke. You're at high risk for a major stroke within the next 5 years. Need lifestyle changes. Medication. Reduce stress. They sat in the truck in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes after his discharge, neither speaking. Kenneth finally broke the silence, his right hand trembling slightly. Residual effect. I guess we're both breaking down. You're not a tractor. Same principle, though. Things wear out. Rebuild what you can, work around what you can't. The impact on Right Equipment Services was immediate but subtle. Kenneth's handwriting affected. Right hand, not as steady. The calendar system he'd maintained on the kitchen wall became Catherine's responsibility. She took it over without discussion, understanding that her father's dignity mattered more than acknowledging his limitations. Brenda was 63 that year, feeling her own body's response to decades of mechanical work. Arthritis had started in her hands around 1996, making morning stiffness a regular companion. She could still work, still rebuild engines and hydraulic systems, but recovery took longer. A full day in the shop meant evenings with swollen knuckles and aching shoulders. She started keeping ibuprofen in her truck, taking it prophylactically before heavy jobs. The realization hit her one morning while rebuilding a transmission. She needed help with the physical work. Not supervision, not training, just another set of hands capable of doing the heavy lifting she could no longer sustain alone. The business had revenue to support hiring someone part-time, and Brenda's body was making it clear that part-time help needed to become full-time sooner rather than later. Brandon Walker showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning in June 1999, 22 years old, drove a beat-up Ford Ranger with 200,000 miles showing on the odometer. He found Brenda in the shop working on a hydraulic pump, waited until she finished before speaking. I heard you might need a mechanic. Brenda looked him over. Work boots worn but maintained, jeans with grease stains that suggested actual experience rather than affectation, hands that showed calluses in the right places. Who told you that? Nobody. But you're running 28 tractors and you're doing it alone. That's not sustainable. The directness appealed to Brenda. Too many young people danced around what they wanted, tried to seem casual about opportunities they desperately needed. Brandon just stated the obvious and waited for her response. She tested him with a hydraulic pump she'd pulled that morning, a unit with a bearing failure that had created secondary damage in the valve body. She handed it to him without explanation. What's wrong with this? Brandon turned the pump over in his hands, examining the housing, the shaft, the mounting surface. He spun the drive shaft carefully, feeling for resistance. Then he looked up. Main bearing failed, probably ran hot before it seized. You've got metal contamination in the valve body now. Needs complete teardown and cleaning. New bearings. Check all clearances. Brenda hired him on the spot. $14 an hour, full-time, start Monday. The first year was difficult in ways Brenda hadn't anticipated. Brandon knew mechanics, understood diesel engines and hydraulic systems and electrical troubleshooting, but he thought like a dealership mechanic, trained to diagnose and replace rather than understand and prevent. Brenda needed to retrain those instincts, teach him that maintenance wasn't about fixing broken things, but about listening to machines before they broke. She started him on service records. Every machine in the fleet had a complete history, handwritten logs dating back to acquisition. Brenda made Brandon read these records before touching any equipment, made him understand a tractor's past before working on its present. This isn't a log of what happened. It's a story of what the machine is telling you about what it needs next. Brandon struggled with the concept initially. He wanted clear diagnostic procedures, step-by-step processes he could follow to consistent results. Brenda's approach seemed too intuitive, too dependent on experience he didn't have. The breakthrough came 6 months in. Brenda sent him to service a 1970 Case 97. Oh, that had been out on rental for 3 months. The farmer reported no problems, but the machine was due for routine inspection. Brandon came back with his report. Everything checked out. All systems operating within normal parameters. Brenda asked about the oil analysis. Brandon had checked the level, confirmed it was full and clean-looking. Brenda asked about the color, the smell, the viscosity. Brandon went back to look again, this time paying attention to qualities beyond pass-fail metrics. When he returned, his face showed understanding. There's metal in it. Fine particles. Nothing obvious, but it's there. What does that tell you? Something's wearing that shouldn't be. Probably a transmission bearing starting to fail. They pulled the transmission the next day. Brandon was right. 2 bearings showed early-stage wear that would have become catastrophic failure within another month of operation. Brenda let Brandon do the rebuild under her supervision, walking him through proper clearance measurements and assembly procedures. When they finished, she could see something had shifted in how he approached the work. By 2001, Brandon was handling service calls independently. Brenda still supervised complex rebuilds, but routine maintenance and minor repairs became his domain. His diagnostic skills improved rapidly once he started listening to machines instead of just measuring them. Within 3 years, he was rebuilding engines. Within 5, Brenda trusted him with work she wouldn't have delegated to dealership mechanics with twice his experience. Kenneth watched this progression from the kitchen table one evening in 2002. His Parkinson's, no, his stroke effects, were advancing slowly but noticeably. He needed a cane for stability now. His medication regimen had become complicated enough that Catherine managed it with a pill organizer and strict schedules. He could still work, still handled customer phone calls and basic administrative tasks, but his role in the business was diminishing as his health declined. Kenneth turned to Catherine, watching Brenda and Brandon through the window. They were in the yard, examining a tractor's rear axle, Brandon pointing at something, while Brenda nodded. "Brandon is your mother's succession plan." Catherine looked up from the accounting she was reviewing. Her father's face showed something beyond observation, a kind of relief that came from seeing the future arranged properly. "I didn't say she's retiring. I said he's her insurance." And Kenneth was right, because what none of them knew yet, what they couldn't see coming, was that in 7 years, Brenda's body would force a transition she'd spent her entire life avoiding. The machines don't care if you're male or female, young or old, educated or not. They only care if you listen. And Brenda Wright had taught Brandon Walker how to listen. Wednesday afternoon, late January 2006, Brenda was in the shop alone, working on a fuel injection system, 1971 John Deere 4320, Brandon out on a service call somewhere north of town. She felt pressure building in her chest, weight making breathing difficult. First thought, indigestion, something from lunch sitting wrong. The pressure increased. Her left arm went numb. Brenda sat down on an overturned bucket because standing suddenly seemed impossible. The shop spun slightly, vision narrowing at the edges. She sat there for 20 minutes, trying to decide if this was serious or if she was overreacting, if calling for help was necessary or embarrassing. Finally, she walked to the house. Kenneth was napping in his recliner, afternoon pattern since his stroke. The medication made him drowsy. Brenda touched his shoulder, and he woke immediately, seeing her face, understanding before she spoke. Kenneth called 911. The paramedics arrived in 14 minutes, loaded Brenda into the ambulance while she protested that she could drive herself. Kenneth rode along, his walker folded in the back, his face showing the kind of fear that came from watching your partner of 47 years struggle for breath. The hospital kept her for 11 days. Tests revealed significant arterial blockage, damage to heart muscle that meant Brenda's days of heavy physical labor were over. The cardiologist was direct about limitations. No more crawling under machines. No more lifting components heavier than 20 pounds. No more 16-hour workdays during peak season. Brenda listened to these restrictions with growing frustration. Her body had betrayed her the same way Morrison's had betrayed her 20 years earlier. Told her she was done when she still had work to finish. "Can I still drive?" The cardiologist nodded. "Then I can still work." Catherine brought Kenneth to the hospital every day, managing his care and the visiting schedule. Brandon visited after finishing service calls, standing awkwardly by the bed, unsure what to say to someone who taught him everything he knew about machines, but nothing about illness. Brenda reassured him that the business would continue, that she just needed a few weeks to recover. But recovery meant accepting a new reality. Brenda could diagnose problems, could direct repairs, could manage customer relationships. The physical work, the part she'd always done herself, now belonged to Brandon. The transition took 3 weeks. Brandon was 30 years old, had been working for Brenda 7 years. He knew every machine in the fleet by its service history, knew every customer by name and acreage and crop rotation, knew how Brenda thought about maintenance, understood her philosophy of prevention over repair. What he didn't know was whether he could do this without her hands-on involvement. Brenda reassured him by demonstrating she could still be useful without lifting wrenches. She drove to service calls, diagnosed problems from symptoms described over the phone, directed Brandon through complex repairs by telling him what to check and in what order. They developed a new rhythm. Brandon did the physical work. Brenda did the thinking. Together, they maintained the same service standards Right Equipment Services had always provided. But at night, alone in the dark, Brenda felt the weight of what she'd lost. Not just physical capacity, but the direct connection between her hands and the machines. The tactile knowledge that came from feeling a bearing's resistance, from hearing metal speak its distress. She'd spent 48 years building a language with machinery, and now she could only speak it through translation. Kenneth's second stroke came in March 2007, more severe this time. At home watching television, Catherine found him collapsed in the living room, right side completely paralyzed. They rushed him to the hospital, emergency surgery to remove the clot. The recovery was harder. The stroke had damaged more brain tissue than the first one. He regained some movement over the following months, but never walked without a walker again. Speech permanently affected, slurring, searching for words that used to come easily. He needed full-time care by late 2007. Catherine moved back home permanently that summer, quit her small bookkeeping clients. Too hard to manage caregiving and outside work simultaneously. She focused full-time on Kenneth's pill schedules, doctor appointments, physical therapy sessions, and still somehow handled Right Equipment Services accounting. Her own life had rebuilt around supporting parents and business. She'd never married after the broken engagement, no children, life shaped by family duty in ways she'd never intended but somehow accepted. Brenda turned 71 in 2006, feeling every year of it in joints, in back, in the way heavy work left her exhausted for days afterward. But she kept working because stopping felt like surrender. And surrender meant admitting everyone who'd said she couldn't do this had been right all along. Fall 2008. Brenda made a decision. She was going to retire the 1963 John Deere 4020 from active rental, the first tractor, the one she'd bought for $400 at that auction 21 years ago. the machine that had started everything. It had been rented continuously from 1988 through 2008. 20 years of seasonal service across 11 different farms. The customer log showed approximately 14,000 acres of West Texas farmland worked by that single machine. The reason for retirement wasn't mechanical failure. Brenda's maintenance had kept the 4020 running reliably. Engine still strong, hydraulics still functional, but farmers increasingly wanted enclosed cabs. Climate-controlled operator comfort that an open-station 1963 tractor couldn't provide. Demand for vintage equipment was declining as the generation that had grown up with these machines aged out of farming. Brenda could have sold the 4020. The collector market for restored John Deere tractors was strong. A machine with documented service history and proven reliability would bring good money, but selling it felt wrong, felt like abandoning something that had proved her point. Winter 2008 through early 2009. Brenda and Brandon gave the 4020 a complete restoration. Not a service rebuild, not routine maintenance, but a ground-up remanufacture to original specifications. They pulled the engine, completely rebuilt it with new pistons and bearings, machined the cylinder sleeves back to factory tolerances. Every hydraulic seal and line got replaced. Every electrical connection got cleaned and properly insulated. Brenda mixed the paint herself, matching the specific shade of John Deere green used in early 60s production. Not the brighter green of later years, but the slightly yellower tone that characterized machines from that era. She supervised while Brandon applied it, making sure the coverage was even and authentic. They finished in late February 2009. The 4020 sat in the shop, looking like it had just rolled off the Waterloo factory floor 56 years earlier. Brenda insisted on starting it herself, despite her cardiologist's restrictions about physical exertion. She climbed into the open station seat. The engine fired on the fourth crank, settling into the steady rhythm of properly timed diesel combustion. Brenda let it idle, listening to machinery that had been dead for 3 years in 1987, had worked 20 years under her care, and now represented something larger than agricultural equipment. It represented persistence. It represented women who refused to accept limitations others tried to impose. Brenda sat in that tractor seat, hands on the wheel, and felt the weight of 21 years. Not the weight of the machine, the weight of proving that quality mattered more than gender, that hands mattered more than expectations. She drove the 4020 out of the building and across the property, testing everything one final time, then drove it back into the original 1,200-square-foot shop and parked it in the corner. Brandon helped her cover it with a canvas tarp. Under that tarp, the 4020 would wait, preserved but not abandoned. A reminder that some things were worth more than their market value. Spring 2010 brought an invitation Brenda tried to refuse. Dr. Angela Torres had nominated her for the Rural Innovation Award at the Texas Agricultural Conference. The committee voted unanimously to honor her work. Sent an invitation to speak at the conference in Dallas in April. Brenda's initial response was refusal. "I don't do public speaking. Don't see myself worthy of awards. I fix tractors. That's the job." But Kenneth and Catherine both pushed back. Kenneth especially insistent, despite his declining health. From his wheelchair now, can't use the walker anymore. Speech difficult, but determination clear. Kenneth searched for words that wouldn't come easily. "Brenda, let them see you." The weight behind those words carried more than encouragement. Kenneth knew his time was limited, knew his wife deserved recognition she'd spent decades avoiding. This might be his last chance to watch the world acknowledge what he'd always known, that Brenda Wright had built something extraordinary from 14 broken tractors and stubborn determination. Catherine added pressure from a different angle. "Mom, you've spent 23 years proving you could do this. Let people know you did." April 18, 2010, Dallas Conference Hall. Brenda stood at a podium in front of 300 people, agricultural economists, extension agents, USDA officials, farmers. Brenda Wright, 75 years old, white woman from West Texas who rebuilt her life from scrap, wearing clothes Catherine had picked out because Brenda's usual work attire didn't seem appropriate for a conference hall. The speech lasted 11 minutes. Brenda talked about buying tractors nobody wanted, about spending 4 months rebuilding a machine everyone said was worthless, about answering phone calls at 2 in the morning because that's what the work required. She talked about Catherine's spreadsheets showing the market shrinking, about Brandon taking over the physical work, about aging and limitation, and the reality that nothing lasts forever. But while it lasted, we proved something. We proved that reliability matters more than modernity, that service matters more than scale, that one person who answers the phone matters more than a corporation with better equipment. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Brenda stood at the podium feeling uncomfortable with the attention, but also feeling something else. Validation, maybe. Proof that 23 years of work had mattered beyond her customer base, had demonstrated principles that extended past equipment rental into how people treated each other in business. But what Brenda didn't say, what she couldn't say in front of 300 people, was that she'd spent those 23 years proving that a woman could do something everyone said was impossible. And she'd done it not to prove them wrong, but because the work mattered, because farmers needed someone who answered the phone, because giving up meant accepting that Morrison's had been right to fire her, that the world had been right to question whether she belonged. In the audience, Kenneth sat in his wheelchair, front row, Catherine beside him, both crying. Kenneth's good hand, left one, gripped the wheelchair arm, face showing pride, fighting through stroke-damaged muscles. This moment, what he'd wanted to see before dying. The years between 2010 and 2014 were steady contraction. Brenda continued working at reduced capacity, her role shifting toward customer relationships and diagnostic consultation. Brandon ran daily operations, all physical maintenance, fleet management that had stabilized at 44 machines. Catherine took over all administrative functions, books, coordinating rentals, dealing with suppliers. The business remained profitable, serving 28 farming operations, not growing, not failing, found its sustainable size. Kenneth's death came on November 12, 2012. Pneumonia. His immune system weakened by stroke medications. Body couldn't fight the infection. He died at home. Brenda and Catherine beside him, age 77. The funeral drew 150 people. Testament to a man who'd spent 40-plus years selling insurance and building community relationships. At the casket before they closed it, Brenda knelt, whispered something nobody else heard. Later, Catherine asked what she'd said. Brenda smiled. "I told him we did good, didn't we?" Brenda's final year was quieter than the ones before. She still went to the shop most days, still consulted on difficult rebuilds, still took calls from long-time customers who trusted her judgment, but more sitting than working, more watching Brandon than directing him. She started a project nobody knew about, working on it in the evenings after Brandon went home. A manual, handwritten in the same careful script she'd used for service records. 237 pages documenting every technique she'd learned in 50-plus years of mechanical work. Not just procedures, philosophy, the approach to listening that separated good mechanics from exceptional ones. She titled it, "What Machines Tell You If You Listen." The last entry was dated March 2014, 1 month before her death. The machines don't care if you're male or female, young or old, educated or not. They only care if you listen. And if you listen long enough, they'll teach you everything you need to know about engines and about life. April 9th, 2014. Congestive heart failure, the same cardiac issues that had started in 2006, finally overwhelming her system. Age 79. Catherine was with her at the end. Brandon was at the shop servicing a tractor when Catherine called. He finished the job before leaving for the hospital. The farmer needed the machine in the morning. Brenda would have wanted it done. The funeral drew over 200 people. Unusual number for someone who'd never advertised, never sought publicity beyond Angela Torres's academic paper and the agricultural conference speech. Most of the 200 were farmers, or children of farmers, or widows of farmers, people whose operations had depended on Brenda's reliability, whose livelihoods had been protected by someone who answered the phone at 2 in the morning. Shirley Allen sat in the third row, 81 years old, no longer farming, but still sharp and present. She'd rented Brenda's machines for 23 consecutive years, from 1987 until 2010, when she finally sold her land and retired. When someone asked what she remembered most about Brenda, her answer was immediate. She answered the phone. At 2 in the morning during planting season, she answered. And she never once made you feel like you were bothering her. Timothy Moore stood at the reception afterward talking quietly with Gary Young. Both men had rented from Brenda for over 20 years, had built their farming operations on the foundation of reliable equipment and responsive service she'd provided. Never met anyone who kept a promise like Brenda. Gary nodded. She didn't just fix my tractors, she kept my farm alive when nobody else would. Brandon stood apart from the groups, uncomfortable with crowds but unwilling to leave. Several farmers approached him, asking what would happen to Right Equipment Services. Brandon gave the same answer to everyone. We keep going. That's what Brenda would want. Right Equipment Services still operates today out of the same 2 metal buildings on the same property outside Abilene. Brandon Walker runs it, 47 years old now. Hair graying, but mechanical knowledge sharp as when Brenda first trained him. 3 years ago, he hired a mechanic, Nicole Hill from the Sweetwater Votech program, 24 years old. White woman who reminds Brandon of himself at 22, reminds him of Brenda at 12. The fleet has 44 machines, newer than Brenda's original acquisitions. Tractors from the 80s and 90s bought at auction and rebuilt in the shop, rented to the same kinds of operations Brenda served. Mid-tier farms that need reliable equipment without the financial burden of ownership. Brandon kept Brenda's system. He added a computer, used desktop bought in 2015 that runs spreadsheet software alongside the handwritten service records. But the handwritten records remain. Every machine carries a paper history from the day it arrived. The filing cabinet from Brenda's kitchen now sits in the office corner, still organized her way. The 1963 John Deere 4020 remains in the corner of the original 1,200 square foot shop under its canvas tarp. Brandon starts it once a year, on the anniversary of the March 1987 auction where Brenda bought it. Every spring, a private memorial to the woman who proved that broken things could be rebuilt and that people who'd been counted out could still create value. The ritual happens the same way each year. Tractor starts on the 3rd or 4th crank, engine maintained even in retirement. Brandon lets it idle 20 minutes, listening to diesel combustion that sounds exactly like Brenda described it should sound. Machinery doing exactly what machinery is supposed to do. He doesn't drive it anywhere, just sits in the seat and listens, understanding that some sounds matter beyond their mechanical function. Brandon found Brenda's manual after her funeral, 237 handwritten pages, techniques and philosophy, knowledge accumulated over 5 decades and transcribed in careful script. He keeps it in the shop, refers to it when facing difficult rebuilds, treats it like the sacred text it is, the last page, Brenda's final entry, sits bookmarked. Brandon has read it hundreds of times, but the words still carry weight. The machines don't care if you're male or female, young or old, educated or not. They only care if you listen. And if you listen long enough, they'll teach you everything you need to know about engines and about life. Catherine is co-owner now, handles all business administration while Brandon manages operations. She married in 2015. Age 52, husband is an accountant she met through work, has 2 stepchildren from his first marriage. The children visit the shop sometimes, watch Uncle Brandon work. Catherine tells them stories about their grandmother, about the woman who bought 14 broken tractors and built a business the world said couldn't exist. 2 years after hiring her. Present day, Nicole Hill is working in the shop, struggling with a hydraulic pump rebuild. Brandon watches from the doorway, doesn't intervene immediately. Nicole finally asks the question that's been frustrating her all morning. How did Brenda know when to replace versus rebuild? Brandon pulls the manual from its shelf, opens to the section on hydraulics, hands it to Nicole. Read this, then feel the pump again. Nicole reads for 10 minutes, then picks up the pump, spins the shaft differently this time. Something shifts in her face. It's not the bearing, it's the seal clearance. Brandon smiles. Now you're listening. Nicole didn't know it yet, but she'd just crossed the same threshold Brandon had crossed 25 years earlier. The moment you stop measuring and start listening, the moment the machines begin teaching you. Late evening in the shop, lights on, Nicole working on an engine rebuild. Brandon watching from the doorway the same way Brenda used to watch him. In the corner, the 4020 sits under its tarp. The filing cabinet stands against the wall. The manual rests on the workbench. Everything Brenda built. Still here, still working, still serving. The warehouse in Amarillo still exists too. Donald Harris died in 2008 at age 88. His will left the warehouse to Brenda, but Brenda didn't take ownership before she died. The estate passed to Brandon in 2014. Brandon still uses it like Brenda did. Sometimes brings Nicole on sourcing trips. Shows her how to read part numbers, how to identify discontinued components. Same way Brenda taught him. The philosophy continues. Nicole asked Brandon once in 2022 why they still did handwritten records when they had a computer. Because machines don't speak binary. They speak vibration, temperature, sound. You need to write what you feel, not just what you measure. Nicole didn't understand then, understands now. Brenda's legacy isn't just the business, it's philosophy passed down. Brenda to Brandon to Nicole to the next generation. The manual isn't just maintenance procedures, it's a way of seeing the world. After Brenda's funeral, Brandon opened the manual to the last page. Read Brenda's final entry about machines teaching you everything if you listen long enough. Then he added one sentence below hers, in his own handwriting. She was right. The machines taught me everything, but Brenda taught me how to listen. That page now sits photographed and framed, hanging on the wall next to the yellowed grease-stained academic paper from 1998. 2 pieces of paper, 2 forms of validation, one from the industry, one from the heart, both showing that what looks like common sense to someone doing the work looks like revolution to people studying it from the outside. People ask if Brenda proved something by succeeding as a female mechanic building a profitable business from nothing. But that's not how Brenda saw it. She just saw work that needed doing, and she did it. The fact that she was a woman just meant the work was harder, but the work mattered the same amount regardless of who was doing it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated because of who you are, or watched someone you love fight to prove themselves in a world that didn't think they belonged? Brenda Wright's story isn't just about tractors. It's about what happens when we refuse to accept other people's limitations. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. The shop closes late most nights now. Nicole learning what Brandon learned, what Brenda knew from the beginning, that the sound of an engine finding its rhythm after being rebuilt is more than mechanical success. It's proof that broken things can work again, that dismissed people can build value, that the world's opinion matters less than what your hands create. On the wall by the door, The yellowed academic paper from 1998 still hangs where Brenda taped it. Corners curled, spotted with grease, never replaced. Next to it now, the framed page from the manual. 2 handwritings, teacher and student, proving that knowledge doesn't die with the person who discovered it. It passes down through hands willing to learn, through ears willing to listen, through hearts willing to believe that one person answering the phone at 2 in the morning can change an entire industry's understanding of what service means. The 1963 John Deere 4020 sits silent under its tarp in the corner, waiting for next spring's annual start, the ritual that keeps Brenda's first victory alive. But the real victory isn't preserved under canvas. It's in Nicole's hands, learning to feel what a bearing is saying, in Brandon's patient teaching of what Brenda patiently taught him, in Catherine's spreadsheets managing a business her mother built from $5,800 and stubborn faith, in 28 farmers across 3 counties who still call the same phone number Brenda answered in 1987, who still get the same promise, 4 hours or less, day or night. We'll be there, and they are. Because Brenda Wright proved that quality outlasts prejudice, that reliability beats modernity, that one woman with a wrench and a promise can build something corporations with millions can't replicate. She proved it not by talking about it, but by doing it, every day for 27 years until her hands couldn't hold the wrenches anymore. And then by teaching someone else to hold them the right way. The lights in the shop stay on late tonight. Nicole torquing bolts to specification on an engine that's been dead for months. Brandon watching from the doorway, coffee going cold in his hand. Outside, the West Texas wind carries the smell of turned earth and diesel exhaust. Spring approaching, planting season coming. Farmers will need equipment ready. The phone will ring at 2 in the morning. Someone will answer, because that's the deal. It's always been the deal. And as long as people like Nicole keep learning to listen, as long as people like Brandon keep teaching what Brenda taught, as long as that manual sits on the workbench and those service records fill the filing cabinet and that 4020 starts once a year to remind everyone where this all began, the deal holds. Brenda Wright died in 2014, but what she built, what she proved, what she taught, that doesn't die. It just finds new hands, new ears, new hearts willing to believe that the world's limitations are negotiable, and that the sound of a diesel engine turning over after everyone said it never would again, that sound, that's not just machinery, that's victory.